Biden asks Congress for $33 billion in Ukraine aid. So the funding includes military assistance, but also money to alleviate food shortages and to keep the Ukrainian government afloat. So let's get right into the story. President Joe Biden has asked Congress for another $33 billion in assistance for Ukraine, including more than $20 billion in military aid. We need this bill to support Ukraine in its fight for freedom, Biden said during remarks Thursday from the White House. The cost of this fight is not cheap, but caving to aggression is going to be more costly if we allow it to happen. Now, here's the thing, right? For those that end up maybe stumbling upon this, it's just very odd to see the United States funding Ukraine while trying to not be necessarily aggressive towards Russia, but in a sense, basically fighting against Russia, in quotes, right? He's kind of like on the down low, like, oh yeah, we're fighting against you, but kind of not really. Like, we're kind of like slapping you on the behind, not necessarily on the face, right? While at the same time working on deals with Russia, right? So it's a really weird dance. So Congress previously appropriated $13.6 billion for Ukraine on March 15th. So almost half of the new funding, $16.4 billion, would flow to the Defense Department, much of it for additional weapons. This includes $6 billion for the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative, which provides weapons and equipment directly to Ukraine. Another $5.4 billion would pay to replenish Defense Department stocks that the White House has already sent to Ukraine, including more than 1,400 Stinger and aircraft missiles, over 5,500 Javelin and anti-armor missiles, 700 Switchblade drones, 90 155mm howitzers, 200 M113 armored personnel carriers, and more than 50 million rounds of ammunition. By the way, I think the M113 used to be like a Call of Duty weapon back in the day. So the aid package also asks Congress to increase Biden's presidential drawdown authority, which allows the president to directly send U.S. stocks to Ukraine by an additional $5 billion. The Biden administration has largely used up the $3 billion in drawdown authority previously authorized by Congress. The Biden administration has already sent $3.4 billion in security assistance to Ukraine since the start of the war. Let's see. The request also would provide $2.6 billion to pay for the deployment of additional U.S. troops to the region and $1.9 billion of cybersecurity and intelligence support, including weapon system upgrades and unspecified classified programs. We are providing Ukraine significant timely intelligence to help them defend themselves against the Russian onslaught, Biden said. Now, here's the thing, okay? Doesn't this statement right here, like this sentence, right, basically admit that we are going to war with Russia? The request also would provide $2.6 billion to pay for the deployment of additional U.S. troops to the region, okay? Where we are going to what? Provide cybersecurity, intelligence support, including weapon systems upgrades, right? We are basically going to war without going to war. It's like, oh, we have the gun in our hand pointing at you. We're kind of slightly pulling down the trigger, but not really, right? We're not fully like engaging it yet. It's like this is getting to a very dangerous point that the United States is going to get completely involved and probably just end up fighting Russia, which would be crazy, right? Now, I'm not saying that will happen, but it's pretty much getting to that point. It's like, how many lines are you going to cross before it just goes to being like a full-out war between Russia and the U.S. now? Because right now we're basically fighting Russia in proxy by using Ukraine. So non-military aid. Much of the remainder, $14.1 billion, would go to the State Department and U.S. Agency for International Development for Economic Aid to Ukraine and neighboring allies, including Poland, Lithuania, and Baltic countries. The largest chunk, $7.5 billion, would provide direct support for the government of Ukraine so that critical government functions can continue. Another $4 billion would go toward foreign military financing to assist Ukraine in paying for the weapons it wants to buy itself. Biden also proposes $1.6 billion in humanitarian aid and food assistance for people around the world facing food shortages without Ukrainian exports. And Ukraine is a major producer of wheat and corn. And this is one of the reasons why at the grocery store your food is going to keep on increasing in price. One of the reasons. To help ease the economic disruption in the U.S. caused by the conflict in Ukraine, the White House proposes using $500 million to increase domestic food production. This will help alleviate rising food prices in the United States, Biden said, but really it's not going to do really anything. The proposal includes $1.2 billion for the Department of Health and Human Services to provide assistance to Ukrainians entering the U.S. through the Uniting for Ukraine program. No delays, no excuses. In his letter to Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Biden suggests that Congress fold $22.5 billion in previously requested COVID-19 funding into the legislative package. To avoid needless deaths in the United States and around the world, I urge the Congress to include this much-needed life-saving COVID funding as part of this supplemental funding request. Like, what? The White House's pandemic aid request has been whittled down in talks on Capitol Hill to just $10 billion, and even that summer amount has been held up amid a dispute over Biden's move to end the Trump-era Title 42 immigration policy, barring entry to migrants on public health grounds. And Senate Democrats are considering combining the new Ukraine aid with the stalled COVID-19 package to try to increase pressure on Republicans to relent. Senator Patty Murray, who chairs both the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee and Labor Education Appropriation Panel, said Thursday that lawmakers absolutely should merge the two funding proposals. Look, see, this is the problem that you got to see with a lot of this stuff, right? They really technically want the COVID-19 funding to go into effect, right? But they know that there's not going to be enough Republicans to really pass it, right? So they are going to bring in supporting Ukraine and also COVID, okay? Even though they have nothing together in terms of like, there's no point in combining the two, right? And this is the problem that I see with a lot of legislation, right? Like, if Congress simply voted on very specific things each and every time, there'd be so many things that the majority of the population would actually benefit from, in a sense, right? Or agree on at the very least, right? When you combine two different requests that have nothing to do with one another, you are going to have people that completely disagree with it, and then you're going to paint people in a really bad light because they just don't agree with it, because you're adding a whole bunch of random stuff that has nothing to do with it, right? It's kind of like saying like, hey, this is funding for us to buy oranges, right? And then you're like, oh, this is funding for us to buy brand new cars. We are going to combine the funding requests for both oranges and cars, but you have to agree on both of them combined, right? So if you deny it, if you don't like one of them, like, oh, I don't really want to agree to funding oranges, well, now you're also saying, no, I don't want to fund for brand new cars, right? Or vice versa. Like, it's such a pain in the butt way to go about and doing it, right? Just be open, honest, very transparent, and be like, hey, we're going to vote on this. then we're going to vote on this, then we're going to vote on this. One by one by one. But no, they're not going to do that. Like, it's so stupid. Elizabeth Warren said Thursday that she expects to vote next week on a combined package. And again, like, combining packages is so stupid. This is where you get, like, a lot of the COVID relief bills, a lot of those bills that we printed like trillions of dollars, and all that money basically disappeared, and no one really knows where it went. Okay, and people only got $1,200 to them. It's like, hey, if they split that whole thing up into multiple different segments that people actually read and voted on, things would be way more healthy for the country. So far, the GOP hasn't budged, arguing that Ukraine aid should move separately to avoid getting bogged down in the pandemic funding fight. We can't play politics with this. We need to get it done, Ohio GOP Rob Portman, a co-chair of the Senate Ukraine caucus, said Thursday. Senate Majority Leader Charles Schumer didn't explicitly endorse the combination strategy in floor remarks Thursday, but he called on Republicans to drop their objections. Republicans should work with Democrats to pass another COVID funding bill ASAP. No political games, no poison pills, no dithering about, Schumer said. In short, we must get both Ukrainian emergency relief and COVID funding relief done quickly. But again, the one has nothing to do with the other, right? It makes no sense to do something like this, right? Like, this is the thing. You know that there is going to be so many people against one of these fundings, right? So you are going to try to combine it with something that everyone technically cares about, right? So, like, it's just such a dirty game to play. In his remarks Thursday, Biden said the most important thing was approving the aid in a timely way. I don't care how they do it, he said. They can do it separately or together, but we need them both. Biden urged bipartisan cooperation and passing funding for both Ukraine and COVID-19. Let's get both of these critical tasks done. No delays, no excuses, he said. Just action now, now. Biden also noted that he'll be traveling to Alabama next week to visit the Lockheed Martin factory where Javelin missiles are manufactured. And on Wednesday, Russia cut off gas supplies to Poland and Bulgaria, two NATO allies, in response to Western sanctions designed to weaken Russia's economy, and the U.S. has already stopped purchasing gas and oil from Russia. We will not let Russia intimidate or blackmail their way out of these sanctions, Biden said. We will not allow them to use their oil and gas to avoid consequences for their aggression. While at the same time, we are working on deals with the help of Russia. Keep that in mind. The U.S. is working with Korea, Japan, and Qatar to help relieve the energy crunch felt by countries that rely on Russian exports, he said. And here's the thing, right? If the U.S. truly did care about making the U.S. more independent, making all the Western countries more independent, they would actually approve companies in the U.S. to actually drill for oil in the U.S. But they're not going to do that. There's permits out there, but they're not actually going to get approved by the government. And like, it's just crazy when you really think about it. Feel free to give your thoughts. It's just like, it's so weird to see something like this, like combining two different packages that have nothing to do with one another, just so that they can try to make one party look better than the other, or worse, or whatever, or trying to. It's just like, I just really don't like how they try to like make things shady instead of just being like, hey, we are going to vote on this, then we're going to vote on this, then we're going to vote on this in terms of priority. The priority is probably Ukraine. So make that the obvious one to vote on right off the bat. Then decide whether or not you're going to fund COVID. Then decide what you're going to do in terms of like student loans and all that kind of stuff. There's no point in combining a whole bunch of things because no one ends up knowing where any of this stuff ends up actually going in terms of like the money. If you want to learn how to get a debt, and master your money, go to 40unbox.com. And again, feel free to give your thoughts as to this plan. Do you like the combination of these two different funding requests or not? Personally, I don't like this, right? It's kind of like the same, I view it the same way as this, right? Taxes would be simple for everyone involved if they simply put, like, okay, we are going to vote that every single person that makes money, that makes an income, pays like a 10% flat tax with no loopholes. And that's all on one piece of paper. Let's vote on it, right? It's like, it keeps it very simple. Everyone knows what they're going to pay in taxes. There's no guesswork. There's not going to be any threats of you potentially going to jail for not paying the correct amount of taxes. You're not going to pay a bunch of fees, all that sort of stuff, right? But no, they can never make things simple.